When you've been playing games for a few years, you will start to become very familiar with different genres and how they operate. That is, provided you don't only play one game or one type of game. But that kind of self-imposed restriction is not how I do things, so I won't acknowledge it. Anyway, the Metroidvania genre emerged over the course of a couple decades as influence from Metroid and Castlevania congealed into a nice little slop of similar mechanics that soon became its own thing. These games are often in 2D but can also exist in 3D games. And they generally focus on exploring a world that is typically presented in a non-linear, open-ended fashion, but with certain areas that are restricted behind certain requirements. For instance, you might gain the ability to break through certain walls, and now all of those walls are accessible to you, and so more of the world is now accessible too. These games are all about exploring, learning through environmental cues, and becoming more powerful as you backtrack around the environment to do everything that needs to be done. The games in this genre are too numerous to list, but you'll find indie darlings like Hollow Knight and AAA but still relatively niche in comparison to more accessible mainstream games like Dark Souls, inhabiting the general Metroidvania space. These games have become something of a staple, especially in indie spaces. But we have certain expectations that come with them. We expect certain types of gameplay, and it isn't very often that something necessarily innovates in this space. Sure, there may be fantastic examples of the genre, but what they're doing is more of a refinement of the genre rather than something new in it. DOOMBLADE, at first glance, appears to be the same. It has the world-building exploration and segmented narrative presentation you would come to expect from a Metroidvania. It also has the kind of 2D art style and map progression you would consider entirely ordinary. However, in the narrative of game trends as a whole, in which ideas are developed, iterated upon, improved, and perfected, there does not need to be a massive change for things to get shaken up. So, innovation does not necessarily mean doing something completely new. Take the Souls games as an example of this. When Demon's Souls came out, we saw it as innovative in the gaming space, but when you actually look at it, it's basically a third-person hack-and-slash game, with each level having Metroidvania-inspired exploration, which will be further iterated when Dark Souls came along a few years later. It differentiated itself through the very specific way in which patience is rewarded as you deal with unforgiving enemies who need to be studied alongside a dedication to intricate boss fights that are tough but rewarding. There were also smaller things that became part of the general flow of these games, such as the use of replenishing health potions and the need to be strategic when applying them. However, these are not massive innovative changes. These are iterative changes that were packed together into an innovative package. On their own, none of these changes were particularly unique or different, but combined together, they formed something new. There is something similar to be said about DOOMBLADE. Could this game have incorporated a standard combat system and produced a good, if expected, Metroidvania experience? Of course it could have, but that isn't what was done. In the narrative of gameplay innovation, someone has to make an experimental leap, and experiments can fail. If Demon's Souls had not connected with a cult audience and the many figures in the media who championed it, there may never have been a larger Souls franchise. The game was a risk, and it paid off. DOOMBLADE also took a big chance. In most 2D Metroidvania games, you slash your weapon at enemies, unleash your magic, and use whatever upgrades you gain over the course of the narrative, but that's about it. Hollow Knight is a phenomenal game, but its combat system is basically just a hack and slash. Doesn't really do anything particularly unique there. In DOOMBLADE, you do not have to run along the ground, hop around and slash at enemies. Instead, you fly toward enemies by clicking on them. There's basically no distinction between the combat and movement systems in DOOMBLADE. They are one and the same. Explaining the system is a bit harder than just seeing it, but you essentially click where you want to go on the screen, and then shoot around and strategically choose how to engage with your enemies. This means that enemies need to be attuned to this, and some can only be attacked from one direction, or they may use a certain attack which necessitates that you play it safe to get around them, or something similar. Sadly, as the game is a small indie, it did not get much fanfare. However, this is a genuine innovation in this space. The change may seem small, but it fundamentally changes the way you experience the second-to-second gameplay. Nothing else is quite like DOOMBLADE at the moment, or at least that I have seen. A big change in how you play the game is actually in terms of controllers. Sure, some people may play these kinds of 2D action platformer type games with a mouse and keyboard, but most agree that a controller is best. Well, DOOMBLADE defies the expectations of this because it sucks with a controller. It is best to play it with a mouse and keyboard. When I first played this game, I immediately tried it with the controller. I mean, that's the best way to play 2D Metroidvanias. But I quickly stopped, realized that it would be best without it, and it became one of my games of the year. This simple switch up in terms of what you expect is already an innovation. It succeeds in doing something you do not expect. It does something new that changes the way it all feels. Games, like all art forms, are inspired by successes in the art form. Prior to the success of the early Souls games, there was nothing like them. But game development has shifted in that direction because the story of gaming success has shifted. And DOOMBLADE deserves to get some attention for its innovations and have at least some influence on the narrative of game development, even if its changes are niche enough that most may not appreciate them.